Greetings, ladies and gentlefish, and welcome to a review of the IS-6, the machine you can see here, Soviet Tier 8 Premium Heavy Tank. So before we get into the nuts and bolts of this, a little bit of history. There were two IS-6s that were made, designated objects 252 and 253. The Russians seem to use the term object in a similar way to how the British use FV before their vehicles. You know, FV in the case of the Brits just stands for fighting vehicle, and then it's given a designation. In the case of the Russians, you get, or sorry, the Soviets, Russians, whatever. Apologies for that bad distinction on my part. You get object followed by a designation. So there was the object 252 and the object 253. The object 253 was an attempt to mount an electric transmission inside a heavy tank. You know, a similar thing had been tried in the States. You had a similar thing on the Porsche Tiger proposal, and subsequently on the Ferdinand, which used the chassis that were not then used for the Tiger because Henschel won the design. So this had been tried before, but generally speaking it had been fairly unreliable, and once again it proved to be unreliable. So there was the Object 252 that had a conventional transmission. It wasn't an electric transmission, suspension with no return rollers, etc, etc, etc. And, you know, the tank was tested and it wasn't deemed to be a failure or anything like that, but it was deemed that the IS-6, or the Object 252, as it stood at the time, offered no real distinct advantage, or at least not enough of an advantage over the existing IS-2 vehicle to warrant mass production. You know, you still had a heavy tank, it still mounted a very similar or the same 122mm gun, you know, and so on and so forth. It had slight armour advantages perhaps, but these advantages were not sufficient to warrant it going into mass production when there were already IS-2s aplenty. And thus the project was cancelled and it was taken no further. So, what is it that we get in game? Well, you have 1,550 hit points, which, you know, it's about standard for a Tier 8 heavy tank. It's a little bit more than the IS-3, so the regular Soviet Tier 8 heavy tank, but it's about par for the course. 52 tons with a 700 horsepower engine means that this thing, it's not sluggish. I mean, it's not slow for a heavy tank, but you know, it's certainly not the fastest machine in the world. Top speed of 35 kilometers an hour, which is perfectly adequate. Traverse speeds of 26 and 24 for the turret degrees per second are alright, but nothing to really get excited about. And this is a theme that runs throughout the IS-6. If you take it by the numbers, there's really nothing about this tank that's going to get you all that excited. But this is more than just about the numbers itself. Let's continue looking at the armour scheme, and I will go into this in more detail in a minute. You've got 60mm on the rear of the hull, 100 on the side, 100 on the front. To which you might be thinking, hang on, the Tier 7 IS has 120 on the front. Yes it does. Turret, 100 on the rear, 150 on the sides, 150 on the front. Not too shabby. But again, nothing amazingly spectacular. The gun, I'll talk more about the gun in just a second. The view range is pretty awful, 350 meter view range. I mean, it's the same as the IS, it's pretty dire. And realistically, you're not going to increase that view range very much without using binocular telescopes, and I don't really recommend using binocular telescopes for reasons that I'll get onto in just a second. And a signal range of 440 meters, well, usually people don't get too excited or one way or the other about radios, but when you're at Tier 8 and you've got a signal range of 440 meters, that is, not to put too fine a point on it, utter crap. And this is the thing, one of the problems that plagues sort of mid-tier Russian tanks. They tend to have very, very, very bad radios. This does improve at higher tiers, but even here at Tier 8, it's got a cruddy radio. So let's talk about the gun. Well, this is a premium tank, so you just get the one gun to worry about, and this may be looking familiar. It's the 122mm D30. Let's pull up the gun on the IS. So, the IS top gun is the 122mm D25 gun. This is the gun from the IS-6, the D30, and they are, to all intents and purposes, the same gun. In fact, the only advantage the IS-6 gets is a buff to its rate of fire. Accuracy is the same, aim time is the same, damage, penetration, all the same, caliber the same, weight the same. This is essentially the same gun. It's actually, historically I believe it's a development of the D25. It was a slight improvement over that, but it's broadly speaking the same gun. Huh. Hurrah. Okay, well, I mean, that is basically the gun you used on the, or you could have used on the KV-85 at tier 6. It's used on the IS at tier 7. You're still basically using the same gun on the IS-6 at tier 8. This sounds dubious. Well, it's a good news, bad news situation. 390 alpha damage is very respectable for a tier 8 heavy tank. It's not as outstanding as it is at tier 6, where it's frankly ridiculous. At tier 7 it's very healthy. At tier 8 it's nothing to get too excited about. It's very, very standard. 175 penetration on a tier 8 heavy tank is pretty bloody awful. I mean, this is essentially the gun you will be using on a stock IS-3. So if you've played the IS-3 before getting the top gun, you're going to know how this feels like. What this feels like. This is essentially the same gun. The accuracy, garbage, aim time, garbage, etc, etc. It's not even as if you can just load up with premium ammunition to compensate for the cruddy penetration, because your penetration goes up to a whopping 217mm. Just to put that into some sort of perspective, let's have a look at some tier 8 heavy tanks. So that's 217. The Germans. The VK gets 200, so it's better than the VK. Tiger, let's look at the top gun on the Tiger. 225. Now this is with regular armor piercing, so it's worse than the armor piercing ammo on the Tiger, Tiger 2, sorry, and this is a theme that continues. It's worse than the armor piercing ammo on the Carnarvon. It's worse than the armor piercing ammo on the AMX 50 100. It's basically, you bump up the penetration, but you bump it up to a level that's decidedly not spectacular. So far it all seems like a bit of a downer on this tank. Is there anything that's actually good about it? Well, yeah, there kind of is. Alright, so let's go back to the gun for good thing number 1. You know I mentioned that rate of fire? Yeah. That gives this tank the second highest DPM of any tier 8 heavy tank. Only beaten by its tier 8 premium stablemate, the KV-5. So it gets 390 alpha damage and really nice DPM. Good thing number 1. Good thing number 2, and frankly there are only 2 good things about this tank. The armour. On paper it doesn't look anything to write home about, but look at that sloping and angling. And what this essentially means is that the IS-6 is very, very resilient if it is facing people with about 200mm of average penetration or less, so generally speaking equal and lower tier opponents. It can bounce them all day and club them to face with that big old derpy gun. If however it's facing people with say 220 odd millimeters of penetration, IS-3, Carnarvon, Tiger 2, AMX 50 100, I'm looking at you, then it starts being a little bit more of an issue. So basically this tank, oh, there is a third good thing about this tank. So basically this tank is all about DPM, or the, you know, trying to get that DPM out of the gun, and armour. The third good thing is that this tank does not get regular matchmaking. It never sees tier 10 games. So you will see tier 8 and tier 9 games. Basically, it gets the same top tiers that it sees as the IS, but it doesn't get into tier 7 games. Huh. Interesting. Okay. There's no point talking about the grind on this tank. It's a premium vehicle. There isn't one. Consumables, I have your standard 3. I mean, you could probably make a case for some of the others, maybe. I wouldn't bother with the large versions. I wouldn't even bother with combat rations, because this is a premium tank. Tier 8, you've probably bought it to make some money. There's nothing that really gets me excited there. Ammo loadout, well, you can see what I've got. 1 round of HE, might be useful every once in a while. 5 of APCR, 24 of armor piercing. Why don't you have more APCR if the penetration sucks so much? Well, as I said, the APCR doesn't actually give you outstanding penetration. It's useful from time to time, but it doesn't make the penetration outstanding. You have a low ammo count, and firing too much APCR just wipes out the profit you'd make with this tank. So you don't actually end up firing it all that much. I used to run 3 rounds of APCR, 2 of HE, and 25 of AP, but I changed it around a little bit. What about equipment? Well, there's a variety of different choices you could make. I mean, camo net, don't bother. Binos, if you really want to bump up that view range, go for it, but I'm not going to recommend it. Coated optics, an extra 10% on crap is still pretty bad. Cyclone filter, haven't noticed the engine being a particularly problem. Enhanced gun laying drive is a viable option to try and bring the aim time of your gun down, but I think there is a better option. Torsion bars, waste of time. Filling the tanks with CO2, haven't noticed them to be a particular problem, don't bother. Heavy spool liner, yeah, you could in case you get artilleried, but I think it's probably a waste on this machine. Gun rammer, yes. More DPM, yes please. Toolbox, you could make a case for it to get your repair speed, to improve your repair speed. I haven't noticed any ammo rack problems. Vents just all rounds improves your vehicle, and vertical stabilizers also effectively improves your accuracy. So I've got vert stabs, gun rammer, vents. You could possibly swap out one of these for an enhanced gun laying drive, that's up to you. But I guess if you really want, spool liner is an option, but I don't recommend it. As I mentioned, toolbox is an option. I'm not gonna tell you should do it, but it is an option. And if you really want binos, but I really don't recommend it. Not gonna talk about crew skills because always remember this is a premium tank. You don't have a dedicated crew for this machine because it's a premium tank. You can just take the crew from any of your other Russian heavy tanks and whack them in here. So for example, what was the last crew I had in here? It was the crew from my KV3. There we go. And then you can just shove them in there, and they can have the daily double for experience twice in a day and all that jazz. So you'll just end up using the crew skills of whatever Russian heavy tank crew you have at the time. Sorted. Equipment, consumables, crew skills, not a point that's worth considering. I think having said that, it's probably worth jumping into the armor scheme, and then I'll show you some games and then we'll round up as per usual. So here we are with the IS-6. First thing to note before I show you the armour scheme itself, the IS-6 actually gets slightly above average for a Russian tank gun depression at a mighty 6 degrees. By most other nation standards this is still pretty trash, but for a Russian heavy tank that's not too shabby, so that's something to bear in mind. And ba-ba! The armour. So, this tank is not about armour thickness, it's about armour sloping and angling. Rear of the hull is only 60mm thick, but you can get up to, well, if someone's stupid enough, given this nice big fat backside to shoot at, to shoot you on these little shoulder pieces, your love handles if you will, then it's just going to bounce off because it's 60mm. Sloped back at 73 degrees, which is an auto bounce angle. So they just shoot you in the centre here, or the back of your turret, which is 100mm thick, which is not terrible, but it's certainly not great. The side armour of this tank, well again, it's 100mm thick this time, which is actually pretty decent. And it is sloped back at 37 degrees, giving you effectively about 120mm of armour. Whack in the tracks and you can start getting 170, 190, you know, you can start getting some quite thick armour along the side. Side of the turret is 150, same as the front of the turret, which is quite a nice feature, so shooting the IS-6 in the side of the turret is not necessarily the best idea. Front of this tank, well, lower plate is 120mm thick, sloped back at something like 60 degrees, giving you actually, you know, like 230mm of effective armour. So don't bother shooting this in the lower plate unless you've got it flat to you. Upper plate is actually weaker, 100mm at about 60 degrees, giving you 167 up to 120mm of effective armour on the front of this tank. So if you want to pen this tank, you know, shooting it here is not a terrible idea, but you've also got the commander's hatch, which is only 90mm thick. It's only 10mm thicker than the rest of the front of the hull, bringing the effective thickness down to 164. Again, don't shoot it on the love handles at the sides, because they are at an auto bounce angle. However, if you angle your tank something like this, your frontal armour jumps up to an auto bounce, your lower plate is an auto bounce, your side armour is 230mm thick, You then just have to worry about people shooting you again in your love handles, because you flatten the angle of that out, because the IS-6 comes with pre-angled armour. So that's the hull. What about the front of the turret? Well, that's a very interesting affair. 150mm thick, and again you've got this sort of asymmetric turret. So as we're looking at this, on the right hand side of the turret, this armour is sloped back very well, making this basically a non-penetration for most of the guns that will be shooting you. On the left hand side, however, there is a bit right next to the gun mantle that's a bit flatter and is about 150mm. It's not angled at all, so you could put a shot straight through there depending on the penetration of your gun. Add in some gun mantlet, and you can start getting some very thick regions of armour indeed. Not straight around the gun, obviously there's a hole where they have to put the bleeding gun in, but you can get some 637 right in that spot. I mean, what? Anyway, that's Russian gun mantlets for you. Interesting point to note, if the IS-6 is looking straight at you, the roof of the turret, if you've got a shot at the roof and your gun is at least 90mm caliber, you're just going to pen. Because that's only 30mm thick. That's a very steep angle, but if you've got a 90mm gun, you can just shoot it there anyway. These commander's hatches are not weak spots. They are the same thickness as the front of your turret. These are just not worth bothering with. If you want to shoot the turret of this thing, either shoot it right next to the gun, or try and go for the roof, or try and go right next to the gun mantler on this side. Or if you're shooting it in the hull, just shoot it in that flat part, or in that front part, the lower front part there, or through the driver's hatch. Or if he's angled to you, shoot him through the shoulders. But a lot of Tier 8 mediums, for instance, have around 180mm of penetration, so even then, that's not a trivial pen. So basically, the IS-6's armour is pretty darn good. Not because of its enormous thickness, it's not all that thick, but it is sloped back at some very funky angles, making the armour on this tank one of its better features. Having said that, let's go and have a quick look at some gameplay. Here is game number 1. You can see that this is a tier 8 game, so we're top tier. I'm platooned up with Johnny and Craig, who you may have seen in some of my other videos. Johnny's also in an IS-6, and Craig is in his Type 59. Yeah, he's one of the lucky sods who's got hold of that machine. We are here on Fiery Salient, i.e. reskinned Prokhorovka. And this is a standard battle. Now, we were just trying to work out what to do, because this is, while it's good matchmaking for the for the IS-6, it's not a good map for the IS-6, it's really not. It's very open, that favours long-range engagements, and if there's any artillery on the enemy team, and there is, they can really wreck your face. The IS-6 is a tank with bad view range, that likes its engagements up close and personal, so you know, going to that sort of mid-ridge area is not necessarily a particularly great idea, so what we decided to do is that we are going to take the hill on this side of the map. And this is also going to be an example, I guess, of getting the job done when it needs to be done, and you'll hopefully see what I mean when we get to that part. So, you can see that Craig is racing ahead of the two IS-6s here. Now, the IS-6 is not its mobility is not terrible, but it's not a lightning fast tank either. You know, it's somewhere in between. And certainly you can see that when going up hills, the engine power can be a little bit of a struggle. Now, thankfully, the enemy appear to have sent quite a large contingent over to this side of the map. I say thankfully because, you know, we are in a platoon of heavy tanks. The three of us account for half of our team's, a platoon of top tier tanks. The three of us account for half of our team's top tier machines. Don't know why there's a Type T-34 in this game. Oh, because he platooned with a pair of KV-1Ss. Alright, fine. So, KV-1S and Panther II. More of a problem than these three tanks themselves are the people that these guys will be spotting for. I managed to put a shot into that Panther II. Johnny puts one into the regular Panther. and Craig puts one into the KV-1S, and I have a blind shot on that KV-1S. Now, AMX 5100 is a problem because the armour on this tank, generally speaking, works best against guns with less than 200 pen. If it's above 200 pen, you start getting problems. So the Carnarvon, for instance, has 226, and the AMX, if he's using the Top Gun, has over 230. So that can be a problem. Johnny takes a hit there, probably from the Carnarvon, being cheeky. Oh no, it sounded a bit like artillery. Yeah, and the Carnarvon's got the stock turret, so it wouldn't have been him. I get a little bit, I bounce a shot there, but then get a little bit unlucky with my shot on the Carnarvon, as it doesn't even connect, even though I fully aimed it. And that's Russian 122mm guns for you. They're not exactly what one would call accurate. Craig also misses in his Type 59, and I fail to hit that shot. I get penetrated, by the look of it, by the Panther II. And let's just have a look at where that shot penned. There we go, yeah. Straight through the upper front plate, but in the vicinity of the driver's hatch on the front. So basically you can see we're playing this one kind of cagily. Johnny puts another shot into that Panther II, who backs off. And as I say, the main concern is actually not these guys, it's any support they've got from the ridgeline behind them. It's artillery, as you just saw there. They're the things that we're concerned by, and this game is looking really dodgy at 1-5. Object 416 is trying to get us to move forward and spot things. That's fair enough, there's nothing immediately popping up at the moment, so I move forward to see if I can do some spotting. The view range on this thing may be garbage, but I can still spot some people. There we go, there's some spots. Side of the turret of an IS. I bounce on him somehow. Happens. Shot probably deviated from where I was aiming it. And this is, you're seeing the problems with this gun, I guess. Shot on a KV-1S. Misses. Craig manages to hit him though. And there's that AMX. No, sorry, that's Johnny puts a shot into him. That's really too much damage for Craig. Craig has a 100mm gun on that Type 59, which is also kind of derpy. I aim this shot, have a blind shot. Craig picks up the kill, so it doesn't look like I did any damage to that KV-1S, because if I had, I should have killed him. Scoreline is now 3-5. Another KV-1S over there. Nah, I don't really have a particularly good shot. There we go. No. I didn't realise he was just going to stop up there. I thought he was going to continue over the ridge. But again, Craig picks up the kill on that guy. IS over there. Aim in on his position. And I'm rewarded with a nice high damage roll of 440. And he is down. So the scoreline is currently 5-6. And I'm really conscious that we are in a top tier tank platoon and we have been sitting on the top of that hill for way too long. Oh, I only tracked that Panther II. So I want to come over that hill and into the enemy team. We need to take the fight to them. We need to pull our weight as top tier tanks. Johnny finishes off the Panther, I finish off the Panther II. My driver gets taken out, so I put him back in. And we're going for it. Johnny's only on 350 health, alas. I've got about 2/3 of my health remaining. Myself, Johnny, Craig all put shots into this IS. And in a drive-by shooting, I execute him. AMX 5100 is backing off, and the scoreline is currently 8-6, 8-7 as the artillery unfortunately nails Johnny. But Johnny has done a respectable amount of damage before going down. And you can see, despite the fact that I only carry 2 HE and 3 APCR shells, I've actually only got 10 regular armour piercing shells remaining. The ammo capacity, no, some of the shots I've taken weren't particularly well aimed, and this gun is rather derpy, but also the ammo capacity on this tank is not especially high. Nonetheless, keep pushing onward, and we're going to try and find these guys and finish them off. Craig has still got most of his health remaining. We're both on roughly about the same amount of health, I just had slightly more to start with. And there we go. Enemies are lit up. like Christmas trees. There's the artillery, but screw this, I'm going over. He says. I will at some point just say screw it and go over. There we go. Artillery is dead. I managed to avenge Johnny with that kill. And there's just a Borsig, AMX and T-29. Borsig is down. T-29 is over to my left. There's the AMX somewhere. Oh, just over there. Put a shot into the T-29. Re-angle my armour. Ouch. And I was thinking at that point that maybe the AMX is actually using the small gun, because it didn't feel like I took too much damage there. There we go. KV-1S finishes off the T-29, and that's the game. So, that, as I say, was nice matchmaking, but not a nice map for this tank. So by all means, take a look at the post-battle results, and then we'll move on to game number 2. Now, when tanks have a special matchmaking like this, I don't usually show 2 games because you don't have that much of a tier spread. You're either top tier or you're in the middle of the pack. But on this occasion, I decided to make an exception. The second replay I chose, I just wanted to show you a bit more damage output from the IS-6. So I didn't choose it because it's a tier 9 game, that just happens to incidentally be the case. So, as I say, have a look at the post-battle results and then we'll jump into game number 2. Here we have game number 2, and as promised, this is a tier 9 game, so the worst matchmaking the IS-6 will see. About a third of each team are composed of tier 9s. Thankfully, well, they're not the hardest tier 9s to damage in the world. The T-54 and the Object 430 could be problematic, and I guess the IS-8. I'll just shut up now. So this is an assault game, we're on the Siegfried line, we are on the attacking team, and we've spawned north, which is good because I prefer the north spawn to the south. I'm in a platoon once more. I'm platooned up with Craig again, not with Johnny, but with Craig. Craig is in his Super Pershing. And we're just going to go over and see what we can do. Now, the reason I actually picked this game was not because it was a tier 9 game, that was kind of a happy coincidence, but actually because I thought this was more typical of what you can expect from the IS-6. So the previous game I showed you, I did like 2,500 damage or something, but I also got about 2,500 assistance damage. I think it was all spotting damage, which is very unusual for this tank because it has such a cruddy view range, so it's not the sort of thing you can expect from the IS-6. Usually the credits and experience that you make in this tank are because of you damaging and killing enemy tanks. So I thought this game was a better representation of that. I thought this also showed off the armour a little bit better. So, initially, we have already lost a light tank, T-71, who apparently does not follow Mac's train of thought, and has decided that today he is a suicide scout. And we've already lost our artillery to that Centurion. Boo. I was coming up to this bush position. I was originally going to see if I can get spots on people, but there's a Super Pershing, and there's a dead Super Pershing. And we're just going to come up here again. There's an A44 over there. Hello, Mr. A44. And I spend some time aiming this shot at his lower plate, but then he gives me his side, so nice high damage rolled into the side of him to make him wish that he hadn't bothered. And we come up again. Craig puts one into him. And I insult him further by ammo racking him for the kill. I'd have killed him anyway, even without the ammo rack, so it was just kind of adding salt to the wound, insult to injury, whatever. Craig puts a shot into the enemy T-71, and currently the score lines are fairly even. We've lost 2 tier 7s, they've lost a tier 7 and a tier 8. Fair enough. So far I've taken 3 shots. They've all hit, they've all penetrated, they've all done damage. I haven't actually taken any hits in return though, so I see there's an IS-8 over here, and I pull up to use this bush position. He doesn't appear to be looking at me, so I just push my luck a little bit, take a bit of a snapshot, and put a low damage roll into his side. I could complain about the damage roll, but considering I had a high damage roll earlier on, I really can't whinge too much. Trying to get a shot on this Panther, but I can't really make it happen. I'm just looking for opportunities. I don't want to go up there to fight the Panther directly because I'm worried about the Centurion putting shots into me. I'm also concerned in case the Panther has any friends backing him up. But Centurion decides that he's had enough of this rubbish. He's going to come around and finish the Panther off. Having a look at the enemy Centurion. Sadly, our Centurion fluffs his shot. But he's going to reload, get into position and whatnot before I get around there, so he's probably going to get the kill. And I switch attention to a T-54E1, who you'll see more of a little bit later. T-71, alas, I've no idea where that shot goes. And that Centurion gets killed eventually by artillery, but interestingly, there's no one else on the ridgeline back there where the tank destroyers usually hang out. Another high damage roll into that T-54. Nice. So I can be a little bit aggressive around here. I just have to worry about artillery and anybody shooting me in the right hand side. So I'm thinking about going after that Centurion, but I see there's an M46 pattern and I have a very thin shot just through this little gap here, and I get rather lucky with an above average damage roll, which is nice, penetrating hit, and destroyed his track by the look of it, and we're helped along by our Object 430 version 2, who kills his allied T-44. Don't know why, I assume it was an accident. So Craig is engaging this Centurion Mark 1. I come round to give him a hand, and the two of us can work over a Centurion. I mean, a fight between a Super Pershing and an IS-6 versus a T-71 and a Centurion Mark 1 at these ranges, your money would be on the premium tanks, let's be honest. One of their main failings, i.e. lack of penetration, that was a bit lucky. Lack of penetration is not so much of an issue because the armour on the Centurion and the T-71 is not exactly the best. Centurion's coming around to try and fight Craig. He puts a shot into him. I take an artillery shell. I'm coming around to take out the Centurion, but Craig's having none of this rubbish. Gets his revenge by finishing the Centurion off. And I know there's a T-71 over here somewhere, and there we go, we start bouncing shots. Now I'm not really too worried about this guy because with his regular APCR ammo, he has about 171 penetration. Bye! Which is not really enough to reliably penetrate me. And with his premium ammunition, he fires heat. The IS-6 has quite a lot of spaced armour, so I'm not too worried about that either, even though it has higher penetration. Scoreline is 10 kills to 7. Sorry, 11 kills to 8. And there's an IS-8, pattern, KB3 and SU-14-1 remaining. M46 pattern, absolutely lovely tank with really bad side armour. IS-8 actually gets that kill. Boo and indeed hiss. I fire at him and the shot actually hit the guy's corpse. So I have that shot on the move, but I miss. If it had been, if the IS-8 had been a little bit longer on the trigger, I'd have got that kill, but never mind. Not to worry too much about it. And there we go, that's the end of that game. So we ended up doing a bit over 3,000 damage there. We also bounced a good number of shots. And I thought that was just all over a more realistic representation of what the IS-6 can do. So, have a look at the post-game results and then we'll flit back to the garage. So, what's this tank like overall? And would I recommend it? Well, the first thing to note, I did not actually pay for this machine. There was a mission last Christmas, so Christmas 2013, where if you played a stupid amount over a 4-week period, and I was away for one of those weeks, so I had to condense that down to a 3-week period, you eventually got your hands on an IS-6. Ba-ba! So I didn't actually pay for this. How much would it actually be to buy, if you were just to buy it straight from the tech tree, 11,800 gold. It's quite a lot. Tier 8 tanks are quite pricey. Is this tank good? Yes. Don't believe the numbers and judge it by the numbers. This tank is very good. Batters people to death with the gun, bounce shots with your armour, giggle. It is not a sniper's tank, it is a tank to get up close, in your face, beat you to death with that old gun. That's the sort of tank it is. But it is one of those tanks that's very dependent on the matchmaker. If you find yourself in a tier 9 game with bunches of E75s everywhere, you're going to cry. Because really the only way you can hurt an E75 is with side or rear shots, and even then you might sometimes need to load APCR, or AP shots into the commander's hatch. Why AP? Why not APCR? Because it makes no difference. The lower plate isn't really a viable option, trust me. It's really annoying. But conversely, if it's you and a couple of other tier 8s and everyone else is lower tier, yeah, you can giggle and batter your way through them, especially if it's like a city map or something. There are some points, but so here's the point most people want to consider, I guess. It's a tier 8 premium, you buy it to make money. Does it make money? Yes, of course it does. All the tier 8 premiums make money. Does it make good money? Yes, it does. There are a couple of things that hinder its money-making ability. So one, garbage view range. So, I mean, this is offset a little bit to the fact that you will often be close to the enemy. But don't be surprised, therefore, if you often don't pick up lots and lots of spotting damage because your view range is kind of crappy. Two, the shells are quite expensive. These 122mm shells are over 1,000 credits each. The HE shells are 608, or almost 5,000 credits if you're firing APCR at any point. So there's that to bear in mind. And of course, because they've got low penetration, it means that bounces are a thing that happen, especially if you're going to take a shot at any sort of range that isn't point blank. So that can kind of eat into your profit margin, but this is a decent tank that does make good credits. Is it overpowered, as some people claim it is? I don't think it is, because yes, it has good DPM, yes, it has good armour, but it's dependent on the matchmaker, and it really struggles against some opponents in a way that the regular tier 8 tanks won't. This is worse than the IS-3. The IS-3 has lower DPM, but the IS-3 has better all-round flexibility, especially in relation to its gun. Lower rate of fire, but that extra 50mm of penetration is very nice on the BL9 gun. Or the Tiger II, or the Carnarvon, or whatever your regular tier 8 tank is. So the question that people tend to ask an awful lot, what's the best tier 8 premium that I should get? And if you're asking that question, frankly, you're kind of missing the point. Tier 8 premium tanks are there to make money. They have a very large credit multiplier, which is great. But why is that missing the point? It's missing the point because you will pick, or should pick, the machine that suits you and fits the tanks that you have. If you've ground your way up the American heavy line and you want a tier 8 premium, well, you're not going to buy this because you will want to take your crew from your American heavy line, American heavy tanks, shove them in the premium, go out and make money. You'll go and buy a T-34. If you've gone down the British heavy line, well, that's a bad example because there isn't actually a tier 8 premium option for them. Okay, if you've gone down the French line, you'll get the FCM50T. You'll pick the tank that suits your playstyle and that matches with the nations that you are going for. So sure, if you are making your way down the Russian heavy lines, this may well be the tier 8 premium tank of choice for you, as it is the tier 8 premium heavy tank that you can pick up in the gift shop or from the tech tree all the time. The KV5, which is the old one, only now turns up from time to time. The IS-6 was its replacement, basically. Yeah, you can pick that up and you will make credits with it. I would say, on the one hand, it's not a massively difficult tank to play. There's not much finesse to it. You drive forward, you angle your armour, you batter them to death. Move on. The flip side is, you can't be a complete beginner. One, because tier 8 players will wreck you if you are, but two, because you really need to know weak spots with this gun. The penetration is not very good, so you need to know where you can and cannot get through your enemy's armour. So I don't think this is overpowered, but it's a very good tier 8 premium tank. You know, it comes with my recommendation if you have a Russian heavy tank crew. I think all the Tier 8 premiums, I'm excluding the Type 59 from this because I don't own it and I never will own it in all likelihood because it's the Type 59. But they're all well balanced, they do a good job of making money, with the possible exception of the Super Pershing, which is just god awful in every way, but that's a discussion for another day. Yeah, so by all means go out and get yourself this. I would recommend doing, if you're going to buy this, I recommend doing it when there's a special on. Just to save yourself some cash. You know, why not? As I say, I didn't even buy this thing. But it's a good machine overall. Go for it. So I hope you guys enjoyed that review, possibly even found it vaguely informative. If you did, please feel free to catch some of my other videos and or subscribe to my channel. And I wish you very happy hunting on that battlefield. Ciao, ciao.